In this video, we review the basics of typography and how to work with fonts in Figma. If I choose the text, in the design panel on the right, I'll get the typography settings. From the font name, its style and size, something you should be familiar with, to such settings as line height, for example. Line height controls the amount of space between baselines. The blue lines that you see in the text block, I've continued them as pink lines outside the text block. They are baselines. The space between one baseline to the next is called line height. Visit it here. If I remove the value that we have here, I'll get the default value that is set in the font. As you see, it's less than the value I've set manually. In many fonts, the line height should be increased a little bit for better readability. The smaller the font, the bigger should be the line height. Some fonts already have a good default line height, so rely on your eyes to decide if you need to adjust the line height. The next value is for letter spacing. It's the space between the letters. I've increased it to 10 pixels and got more spread text. You might want to increase this value for very small fonts, for example. The next value is the space between the paragraphs. Currently I have two paragraphs with an 8 pixels gap between them. If I increase this value, the paragraphs will have a bigger space between them. The next value controls the size of a text block. The icon on the right sets a fixed size. It means that I can control manually both the height and width of the text block. And I can also change the text alignment inside the text block. We can set it just under the text element icons. For example, if I align text to the bottom, it will jump to the bottom of the text block. I'll change it back. The next icon sets the height of the text block automatically based on the text content. And I can set the width of the text manually. And the first icon, Auto Width, also sets the width of the text block based on the content. I can also set a text alignment and some additional settings such as underline, lists, or lettercase. We have reviewed the Figma panel. Now let's review the font itself. I have prepared an example for you. This Word has an Open Sans font that we are going to review. I've added E and C letters to the Word typography because on these letters it's easier to see the difference between the fonts. I have also marked the area that typography Word takes, from the ascender in H to the descender in Y. When we will be changing the fonts, we are going to pay attention to how the height of the ascenders and descenders is changing, and also how X height is changing. X height is the height of a letter X that does not have any ascenders or descenders. Open Sans is a humanistic font with a good readability. Why is it humanistic? Because letters in it have a smooth shape. Look for example at the G letter, a beautiful smooth shape, or the letter R. Look at the smooth transition from a thinner line to the bolder one. The R stem is not just a straight rectangle as in grotesque or geometric fonts. It has its own individual shape. Humanistic fonts look friendly and often have good readability. But in the dense UI we often use grotesques because they are more narrow. We are going to review grotesques in a moment. But first let's understand why Open Sans has a good readability. First, its letters are easy to recognize and distinct from each other. We can again look at the shape of G letter or the tail of the Y. These small details help to distinguish the letters and hence it's easier to read the text. Open Sans also has a big white space inside the letters. Look at the P, at O, or look at the white space in E, these two areas, and C. White space also helps to distinguish the letters. Another important feature of a readable font is a big X height, the height of a letter without ascenders and descenders in comparison to the height of the font. Let's now compare Open Sans with Futura, a geometric font. Futura is the default font on Mac, but it's paid font, so be careful. It's a geometric font and, as you might guess from its name, is quite futuristic. It's geometric because its letters are based on geometric elements, on circles, on rectangles. You can use this font in the headers, for example, if you want to achieve a modern style. But for the base paragraphs, this font is worse than Open Sans. Look how similar are the letters. Look at A and O, they become much more similar. Look how G has lost its individuality, how Y lost its tail. And also white space in the letters with holes become less. Look at E, C, or P. They have less space inside them. It seems like X height is the same, but ascenders and descenders become bigger, so relatively X height becomes smaller. Nevertheless, it's a quite readable font. Let's compare it with the Badoni. It's also paid. I'm showing you the paid fonts because I want you to get familiar with the legendary iconic fonts. I'll show you later where to search for good free fonts. Badoni is good for elegant and luxury styles. It's a font with serifs and high contrast. Look, Y has one very thin side and one very thick side. This contrast makes Badoni elegant, but also makes it difficult to read in small sizes. Also, X height became much more smaller, even though the font does not fill the height of the pink area. Let's now return to Open Sans and compare it with the grotesques that are often used in UI. Open Sans is a good font for base paragraphs if the space allows it, but the space can be limited. Sometimes UI has to be informationally dense and contain a lot of text. Which font is better to use then? Android and Apple already thought about it. The standard system font for Android and iOS are narrow and have good readability. Let's look at the default font for Android. It is Roboto. Look how much narrower it is. It became narrower by this amount. But the white space inside the letters remained large. And if we look at X height, it's even bigger than in Open Sans. The descenders don't fill the pink area, so relatively it's bigger. It means that Roboto has good readability, though it is narrow, so you can have more content on the screen. But Roboto is not humanistic. Look that G now is more strict and R now is more straight. Let's look at one more legendary font. It is Helvetica, and it is grotesque. It is probably the most popular font in typography and graphic design. It even has a movie dedicated to it. It's also a paid font, so be careful. This font is wider than Roboto. It also has a large white space inside the letters. But it has more individuality than Roboto. Look how nicer and smoother is A, and the letter Y got its tail back. And the X height is bigger than in Open Sans. The word doesn't fill the height of the pink area. I've mentioned several times the paid fonts, but what to do, where to find the free fonts? You can do this at fontsgoogle.com, for example. It is a website where Google provides you with free fonts. And another good news. All the fonts from this website are already in Figma. Figma automatically loaded them for you. You don't even need to download or install anything. Just go to Figma and search there for the fonts that you've liked. Here you can search the fonts by category and by language. The first category is serif fonts. Serifs are those small lines or strokes attached to the end of the larger strokes. They originated from Greek and Latin writings. And most of the first printed fonts were serif, so if you need a classic style, you can choose serif fonts. You can use them in headings and big paragraphs, but avoid using them in small fonts. The resolution of some screens can make it difficult to read. The next category is the main category for UI. It's sans serif fonts. These fonts don't have serifs. Many of them are suitable for UI. Which are better to choose? First of all, look at the readability. We have just discussed it. Second, choose fonts that have more than 5 styles. Lato, for example, has 10 styles. Roboto has 12 styles. And Open Sans is variable. It means that the styles can be flexibly adjusted. More styles mean bigger flexibility for you. For example, Montserrat starts with a thin style. By the way, use thin styles only for big headings. It is difficult to read it in small sizes. And it goes to the bold styles. The next category are display, handwriting, and monospace. Use carefully display and handwritten fonts because they have poor readability. Monospace fonts have good readability. Each letter in these fonts has its individual shape. For example, in some fonts you might confuse an uppercase letter I and a lowercase letter L. In monospace it will not happen. Look, Google probably has Roboto for its interface, and letters I and L are almost identical, but nothing like this in monospace. That's why these fonts are used for code. But in UI they often don't look good because each letter takes the same space. For example, the space between uppercase Y and the lowercase o is usually smaller. It's called kerning. These letters can be put closer to each other because of their shapes. But monospace fonts don't have the kerning. If you want to learn more about fonts and dive deeper into graphic design, I recommend you to read the book Stop Stealing Sheep by Eric Spiekerman. This book is easy to read and will give you a deep understanding of typography. Hey, this was a video from my free UI design course. Make sure to check the full playlist out and hit the like button and subscribe for more free content about design.